the SWHR folks for inviting us here. I think you're going to hear a lot of common themes when I talk. I'm going rogue here a little bit. I'm not going to have any slides, so I figured in my 5 minutes I'd spend too much time clicking back and forth between the slides. But I wanted to sort of take some of the themes that you've heard from the other speakers and sort of bring it together and be a little controversial. So let me go ahead and get started. But my excitement is really around the molecular diagnostic industry because I think it's going to help solve some of the key issues we face in healthcare. I believe one of the biggest challenges in our healthcare system is that we pay for activity rather than results. Think about it. You'd never pay your plumber if they didn't fix your drain. But you expect success when the plumber comes. But when you go to the doctor, you don't always expect success. We pay for what the doctor does, not how you feel after the visit. And I don't think that's completely illogical. Our system was built on the notion that biology is complicated. We heard that clearly this morning. And since we don't know what treatments will work or what procedures are necessary, we couldn't ask the doctor to be as effective as our plumbers. We've decided to pay for effort and activity rather than success and performance. Basically, we've been willing to hold the medical community to a lower standard than our plumbers because we can't see the human body as well as we can see under our sinks. Remember, we really do call it the practice of medicine. We practice it because we haven't quite gotten it right. As we heard earlier this morning, it was just over a decade ago that we completed the sequencing of the first human genome. The power of that milestone and the technology that's come from that innovation is allowing us to move away from this trial and error medicine. We can now see biological processes in ways we've never seen before. Our understanding of the biology has improved. As we heard, it's gotten a little better. We still got a long way to go. And our ability to measure and monitor things going on inside our bodies is vastly different today than it was a decade ago. To some extent, we're now allowing physicians to get a glimpse of what the plumber has seen for a long time. This allows us to do a better job of identifying which patients will benefit from which treatment at which time. We can stop rewarding activity and start rewarding improved health. And we've heard about that today. We've heard about the challenge of making sure we don't do things that are unnecessary in our healthcare system. Let's talk about a big area, coronary disease. Evan did a great job of showing some of the examples in cancer, and I'm very familiar with those companies. Actually, we've got some common funders. But cardiovascular disease is a huge issue around the world. 1 in 6 deaths in the US is attributable to coronary disease. 3 million patients a year show up. That's 8,000 patients today, tomorrow, every day of the year show up in their primary care offices complaining of signs and symptoms that might be associated with a blockage in their coronary arteries. Basically, they complain of something between their belt and their neck. But the physicians know that 90% of those patients don't have a problem that's related to coronary disease. They don't have cardiac problems, but our system rewards the physician and the patient for going down a cardiac pathway unnecessarily, doing lots of tests and procedures that have a low chance of finding anything that's clinically relevant. The typical path for these patients, they show up in primary care. Physicians worried enough about them because they don't have good tools to rule out. They send them to a specialist, a cardiologist. The cardiologist gives them a series of tests, often an imaging test that uses exposure to radiation, sometimes a radioactive dye. For women, particularly ineffective tests because as they go through all the breast tissue so they don't get a very good image. If after those kinds of tests the physician is still worried, they send you to the cath lab. The cath lab, they take a lovely little metal wire basically and stick it up your groin and snake it into your heart to see whether you've got got obstructive coronary disease. Not a lot of fun. And yet when we do all that and we send patients to the cath lab and we spend $3 billion sending them there, 60% of the time those patients don't have obstructive coronary disease. For women, it's even worse. 80% of the women that show up in the cath lab with stable chest pain symptoms don't have obstructive coronary disease. We can no longer afford either the healthcare costs or the healthcare implications of that. So how does the molecular diagnostic industry solve this problem? Let me tell you about how we went at CardioDx about developing a test in this. First, we listened hard to the people on the front lines. We literally interviewed over 1,000 physicians and heard very clearly that their challenge was not how to treat the patients with coronary disease, but rather how to identify those patients that had a very low risk of having coronary disease, even though they had symptoms that might be associated with it. They wanted a test that could easily and simply take the wide range of patients that show up with symptoms and identify those that they do not need to worry about, and can rule out. They wanted a test that could rule out patients so they did not need to treat them unnecessarily. Once we heard over and over from physicians that this was the clear clinical need, we went to the insurance companies, we went to the payers, because we wanted to make sure that we were solving a problem for them as well. The managed care companies clearly understood that they were overpaying for unnecessary trips to the cath lab, and they had very few tools that could help them fix the problem. Once we had that product concept that worked for both the clinicians and the payers, we turned around to the science team and we said, can you make a test that very accurately rules out patients that do not have a high risk of coronary disease, even though they're symptomatic? And interestingly, we did not focus on genetics. That's what you inherit from your parents, as we heard earlier. But we rather concentrated on gene expression, which provides insight into current biological processes. Genetics use DNA, gene expression uses RNA, and tells you what's happening in your body right now. We chose this approach because we were very focused on answering a specific question in front of doctors. I got a patient in my office today. I gotta decide what to do. Do I send them to a specialist or do I keep them here? It's not about what the lifetime risk of this patient is of getting coronary disease. It's about what do I do right here and right now. Running a test has to be linked to taking an action. Otherwise, it's a waste of time and money. We started looking at all 30,000 or so genes that we have in our body, and through a series of experiments, we narrowed that gene set down to 23 genes plus age and gender, and incorporated those genes and risk factor into a mathematical formula or an algorithm that produces a score from 1 to 40. The higher the score, the more likely you are to have obstructive coronary disease. We launched that test, CORE-CAD, in 2009. Fast forward to today, we've run over 70,000 patients with that test. Almost half of those 70,000 have had low scores. So we've been able to rule out tens of thousands of patients and keep them from unwarranted trips to the cardiologist, from getting unneeded procedures, from excessive exposure to radiation, and from running up unnecessary medical bills. We are now today providing a tool that allows physicians to segment their patients and treat different segments differently and more appropriately. So have we solved the healthcare problems? Absolutely not. But we have provided another example of how molecular diagnostics can move us away from trial and error medicine and closer to the goal of getting the right treatment to the right patient at the right time. Thank you very much. All right.